There's foreboding in the air, waiting for an earthquake. Pandemic spreading, no telling how it might remake a world so divided in so many, many ways. Anyone can see it's no way to greet such days when you can shut your borders, but it'll barely slow the spread with 1 million people homeless and not enough hospital beds. In times like these, we find out that a society is only just as strong as our solidarity. The foreboding in the air can get only thicker as we see our leaders passing blame and getting sicker. A crashing economy, leaders fraught with indecision, only capable of thinking like bought-off politicians. Not enough testing kits, and the ones you got were broken. But hey, the president has spoken. In times like these, we find out that a society is only just as strong as our solidarity. 1 million people wake up in the morning thinking thoughts they never had, till they found that they were sinking on a cruise ship full of holes where if you can't catch the breeze, there are no fences tall enough to keep out the disease. Lifting every boat or watching them all sink, ready or not, we're standing on the brink. In times like these, we find out that a society is only just as strong as our solidarity. Contain an epidemic like in Wuhan or in Seoul, or watch a catastrophe take its toll. Hide behind our gates, cowering afraid, or organize our neighbors in mutual aid. In synchronicity, such great things can be done. A planet to lose or a world to be won. In times like these, we find out that a society is only just as strong as our solidarity. In times like these, we find out that a society is only just as strong as our solidarity. Welcome to the rent strike special live stream broadcast of the first day of the rent strike across the United States, Canada, and many other parts of the world. Everything is moving so fast. I have not been able to keep track of even my own tenants union's position on what's going on. But in any case, I actually don't care because I know what needs to happen. It's very obvious, actually. We all need to take the position of the Los Angeles Tenants Union and insist that there be a suspension of charges of rent, a suspension of mortgages, mortgage payments as well, and effective immediately until the crisis is over. And that's what needs to happen. And that's the only reasonable thing to do in the current circumstances, because so many people, I believe somewhere around half the population of this country, are unable to, are basically living, basically rent, paycheck to paycheck. At least I believe it was 40% of the U.S. is basically one paycheck away from catastrophe. And therefore, this is a country experiencing catastrophe, not just the catastrophe of the virus, which is going to kill unknown numbers of people due to the incompetence of the response of this country's government and many other countries' governments for that matter, but with a lot of notable exceptions. But it's not surprising that this country's government is incompetent to respond, because this country's government is run by literally billionaires who don't have the interests of the population at heart. There's so many resources about the rent strike that's going on. I don't even know where to start. If you just do a search for rent strike on any search engine, you will find a local group forming. It may or may not be a group that pre-existed before. However, that doesn't matter, Let me tell you a secret here, you guys. Whoever you are, whoever's watching, and I'm also very interested in your merge with Attila's live stream. Yeah, however that works, please do. Yeah, incompetence or greed, both. They go hand in hand. But very competent at being greedy, but that's not the kind of competence we're looking for. I think look, as overwhelming as the situation is with so many people in such desperate financial straits and so many people being in a situation where you're trying to figure out what you do in the situation, and you're trying to balance various different considerations, like your own needs, the needs of your family, the needs of your desire to be in solidarity with your neighbors, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of different things to consider when we're talking about these equations, but whether or not you're involved with a pre-existing tenants organization, and whether or not you're in a city with a tenants organization that is leading this effort for a rent strike or not, if you live in a state, or I guess I'm mainly addressing this to my fellow Americans here, but if you live in a state that has suspended evictions, like Oregon and many other states at this point, where they've suspended evictions for 3 months, as well as in New York, despite the fact that both New York and Oregon are run by Democratic Party landlords who only have the interests of landlords at heart. Andrew Cuomo and Kate, what's her name, here in Oregon, are both servants of the ruling class, no question about it. They have been for a very long time. That's why we don't have effective rent control in either of these states. That's why both of these states have massive homeless populations that neither governments have ever been able to do anything about, because they don't want to do anything about it, because they don't actually care about the fact that there are so many people homeless, causing a constant public health disaster in these cities. They don't care about the fact that we have a lower life expectancy rate than other first world countries, due to the fact that, well, lower life expectancy rate than some supposedly third world countries as well, because of the way that we are governed. It is a public health emergency every day in this country, in the cities across this country. And what is happening with the housing? Are they allowing people to move into houses legally? No, people have to squat if they want to move into a house and quarantine and be safe in places like Los Angeles, and they're doing it. But the point is here that I was almost missing, because I'm not reading from a script, but I'm improvising in my, just talking here. The point is that you don't need to be in an organization. The point is that although some people online have, I've seen many different supposedly knowledgeable left-wingers making supposedly knowledgeable left-wing statements about how these people organizing a rent strike don't actually know the difference between not paying rent and organizing a rent strike, and other dismissive statements. And all kinds of supposedly intelligent left-wingers said lots of dismissive things about Occupy Wall Street and other movements. But let me tell all you dismissive left-winger people out there who don't think that people can organize a rent strike because they're not part of a pre-existing organization, you're just you're going to get left behind by events. And stop acting like that, and start joining this movement, and start leading this movement, because we need you. And let me tell you about how reality has actually worked in this world, in this society and other societies. There are historical realities, the way things actually happen, right? The reason why they're talking about a $2 trillion bailout package in this country is because the ruling class is terrified. It's not because they're just terrified of the virus. They're terrified of us. And the reason they're terrified of us is because, we're all unemployed and broke, millions and millions of us, right? So that's a hungry man is an angry man, as, Bob Marley said. Same for all other genders as well, and ages, etc. But people have been saying online dismissive things about memes, about ideas. Okay, that organizing is more important than ideas. But yeah, like Christian says on here on that comment there, I'm very interested in your comments, even if I don't read them all. I'll read them all afterwards. I'm broadcasting on multiple platforms, and I especially like to know about whether you're joining the rent strike or not, and why or why not. But any other comments are most welcome, and I'll be looking at them all later. But yeah, in 1848 and at other times as well, but especially 1848 is a very good example. But there are many, many other more recent examples. Very, very powerful things can happen just from an idea. Okay, the people who are saying, organizing a rent strike is not the same as putting up a meme online. That's actually only true to some extent. It's not really. It's really just basically a dismissive left-wing kind of stupid thing to say. Because the fact is, the reality is, if you study history, as I have done for most of my life, ideas are very powerful. Ideas can change everything. And everything can change very quickly because of an idea. Once people get the idea that housing is a human right, and that healthcare is a human right, and that running water, clean running water, is a human right, people don't turn around from that idea. We're at a crossroads in this country and in many other countries because of this global pandemic and because of the response, the incapable response of many nations to the pandemic. And what we do at this crossroads is the question. And a rent strike and a general strike as well is what we need. And if you can pay the rent, I can pay the rent. If you can pay the rent, that's great, but don't do it. Especially if you live in a state that has suspended evictions. Why pay the rent? You can pay the rent in a few months. Save the money. You might need it for something else. This is a song I wrote last December. Or maybe October. Yeah, no. September. Anyway. This is about what Los Angeles looked like before the pandemic. It's 2019, and looking around at the tents and trash and excrement scattered on the ground. So many mansions overlooking the sea. Stretch limos, Rolls Royces, and movie stars all over Los Angeles County. It's 2019. And one thing I know is most people wish we could rewind to a couple of decades ago. Before the rents tripled, folk began to move out into their cars, into their tents where drivers look on however loudly you shout. It's 2019. But in a black and white photo, it could be 1929. Wherever you go, in every single neighborhood, hungry people wonder why. Some make billions on a blockbuster, while so many are left out to die. It's 2019, where every 8 hours, someone is found cold on the sidewalk beneath the glass and steel towers. In the wealthiest nation in all of human history, so far from paradise, so close to Walt Disney. It's 2019. There's no Dust Bowl, just real estate speculators and all the lives they stole. I don't know what to think when I hear the reporters say 1,000 people died last year living on the streets of LA. It's 2019. At davidrovics.com/quarantine, I have a collection of all the songs I've written about the crisis and other resources involved with the crisis. And at davidrovics.com/landlord, I have a lot of songs about strangling landlords and other songs about doing other things with landlords, slightly less exciting than strangling them. And if you look for my podcast, This Week with David Rovics, I have two of them, Song for Today and This Week with David Rovics. But the latest episode of This Week with David Rovics has my letter to my landlord, my actual letter, not the song letter to my landlord, but my actual letter to my landlord. And you can just make a variation of it to send to your landlord too, because you probably only need to change a few words. Maybe omit the paragraph about being an artist, unless you're an artist, but whatever you do, you're probably unemployed. The thing is, this country was a complete disaster before the disaster, and so the idea, even if we get this $2 trillion bailout, most of which will go to big corporations such as the Randall Group, which owns this building I'm broadcasting from, where I live, where I'm not paying the rent right now, as of this month. As of right now, I've been paying the rent every month on time since 2007, and that ends today. And this is a song I wrote about my landlord when I thought my landlord might be a person, before I realized my landlord is a corporation. And I've often then since wondered, how do you strangle a corporation? And people very confidently answered that question in Belfast without missing a beat, one at a time. Okay. Writing you this letter because among the choices it's probably better than listening to voices raging in my head saying point and shoot. Then after you're dead, your face meets my boot. I don't know your name, it's better that way, cause I can't play this game, who knows what I'll say. I feel like I'm burning, I've had it up to here. It's time that you were learning the meaning of fear. I live in these apartments of your private property among your residents. Most of us agree that you're a piece of crap. How does that make you feel? We don't like you one bit, and that's for real. We think you're a thief, that you don't care, seems your one belief. Whatever the market will bear, whatever you can get away with, what you can make us pay. If we ever get justice, you should fear that day. Landlord, landlord. But it's not just you, it's all your kin. The things you do cause the state we're in. You bribe the politicians so they let you off lead. Now the legal situation's just the one you need for you to make millions, for profits to be high, but even billions won't be with you when you die. I'll help you find the death you seek, meet the devil that you serve. If you live another week, that's more life than you deserve. Landlord. It's April Fool's, you think I'm joking? Landlord. In the class war you're waging, there's no question who is winning. But if there's any justice, this is only the beginning. The next act in a play will be written by the tenants, and until your dying day, you'll be paying penance. Your assets will be seized, that's a fucking given. You profiteers of misery start spending time in prison. Then you can get a job, figure out what you do best. You can keep the house you live in, but we're taking all the rest. Landlord. 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 Yo, landlord. Yeah, vigorously. That's the way to strangle a landlord. Let me tell you something, everybody out there. Whatever your ideological belief is, whether you have hope or pessimism, whether you're a socialism or an anarchist or a communist or a believer in the free market, whatever, I don't care. It doesn't matter. Because history doesn't change because of who you are or who you aren't. History is what it is. And history demonstrates abundantly, actually, although the people in power don't want you to know this. It's kind of a secret, just among certain people who read history. it's kind of a little weird little geeky thing, but it actually is really relevant, especially right now. History tells us that people working together in solidarity can accomplish a lot. Maybe not anything, because depending on who else is working in solidarity, like armies can work in solidarity very well and gun down people very well. That's another kind of solidarity, right? So, like Sartre said, football is made endlessly more complex by the existence of the opposing team. Okay, and we definitely have an opposing team in this case. Okay, not just the virus, but the capitalist class, who is also afraid of the virus because they're getting it a lot because they socialize a lot. The capitalists, the musicians, and the people in the refugee camps. We're the ones getting the virus, and the UPS workers and hospital workers especially. But, anybody who's in contact with a lot of people, especially a lot of sick people, of course. I should have mentioned the hospital workers first. Excuse me. I'm so sorry. It's a horrible, horrible situation they're in, which they should never have to be in, which is also because of capitalism, because it doesn't care about them. It doesn't care about, the rich people have their private health care, They're all leaving the cities. You look around this neighborhood, all over the city, the people with money, they're gone. The driveways, they've been empty. No cars. There's flowers falling on the driveways of the fancy houses, The cars are sitting there with flowers on them from all the beautiful trees that are shedding. And that's been going on for weeks. Yeah, Christian says, God bless the NHS and fuck Johnson. I add that part. Because the NHS would be in much better shape if it weren't for people like him. But at least he's got the virus. Solidarity. Here's how solidarity works. You don't need to be part of an organization to be part of solidarity. Some of the best actions that have taken place in the history of the world have had nothing to do with organizations and nothing to do with parties. Okay, I'm an anarchist. Okay, but I'm not. I'm not trying to dismiss all you people who are part of organizations. I'm part of organizations too. I'm a member of the Industrial Workers of the World. I'm a member of the Portland Tenants Union, and still a member of the Musicians Union until I stop paying my dues because I can't afford them anymore. But, we're all members of organizations or not. But the point is that it's the meme, the idea, when it spreads and when people believe in it and when they support the idea, that is what's needed. And so one thing that is definitely needed is some form of communication. People need to be able to communicate with each other. And Facebook and the internet actually does not make that easy. They make that very difficult. And I'm very sorry to see all these people organizing on Facebook. You got to organize on Facebook because that's what everybody's on. But bear in mind that the platform is a terrible, terrible way to organize. And we need to have always look for other ways to organize in addition to Facebook. Don't ignore Facebook, but never do all your organizing on Facebook. They can just pull the plug on that anytime. Do not be reliant on these massive corporations. And I know, look, I'm streaming on a Russian company here, on their broadcasts on the multiple platforms, and so there's always things they can do with the platforms. If they feel threatened, they will turn off the internet. They do that in countries all the time. They will do that here too if they need to. So you need to bear that in mind. But if we still have the telephones, we need to form telephone trees. We need to be able to communicate with each other. If you're in a town that is doing a rent strike, the point is that after if they stop the ban on evictions and start evicting people, then that's when mutual aid and solidarity becomes relevant. Okay, so like here in Oregon, you have 3 months. The government has given us 3 months. We have a 3-month suspension on evictions, a 3-month suspension on charging late fees for non-payment of rent. 3 months. During these 3 months, we need to stop paying the rent, take advantage of this fact, of this situation. If enough people are not paying the rent, they're not going to be coming around evicting half of Oregon while there's a pandemic going on. And even if the pandemic is over by then, people can't pay back all this back rent. There needs to be a suspension. They need to cancel it. Cancel the rent. # cancel rent. Oh, and somebody mentioned that everybody's putting white sheets in their windows to symbolize this cancel rent thing, which is a good idea. Because like so many people live in apartment complexes like ours here, where if you actually put words in the window, you can get fined for that. And I'm sure they haven't suspended that fine. So, but so white sheet, they're not going to fine you for that. Anybody can do that, right? But the point is solidarity. So I keep on saying the point is there's a lot of points, right? I'm reminding myself of my good friend Attila the stockbroker. He's always saying the bottom line is, that's but anyway. The point is that solidarity, what it does require is communication. And I'm just going to sing you an example of how that works. There was a rent strike in upstate New York. This is very relevant for all you New Yorkers out there, but it's for anybody else too. Starting on July 4th, 1839, tenant farm workers met up in upstate New York in the town of Bern, named after the beautiful town in Switzerland. Where there's also a post office in Bern still today with a mural commemorating the rent strike. Okay, the rent strike went on from 1839 until 1848. For 9 years, the tenant farmers of upstate New York refused to pay the rent. And the way that they were able to not pay the rent, which incidentally, the motivating factor for organizing in the first place in 1839 was that their landlord, the Van Rensselaer family, one of the richest families on earth at the time, the Van Rensselaer family, or the new heir, the new patriarch of the family, decided to raise their rent of all his tenant farmers, all at the same time. So it's a lot like this situation here, where something happens to people all at the same time, like, suddenly unemployment all at the same time. It was the same kind of thing. The Van Rensselaer family owned both sides of the Hudson River. And so it was a lot of arable land and a lot of farmers. And up in the hills, where farming is more difficult, that's where the rebellion began. And this is how it always happens. It's always the people who are in a situation where things are rougher, and therefore they need to work together more in order to survive. It was the same kind of thing with who organized the Eureka Stockade in a very similar rebellion, which transformed Australia a few years after the rent strike in upstate New York, which was also related to the rent strike in New York. All these things are related. The 1840s was a time of tumult around the world, and this is all related. It's one planet. It was one planet then too, believe it or not. But in upstate New York, the thing is that what they did was they used to have a system for blowing a horn when it was time for lunch for the people working in the fields. And then they instigated a policy where no longer would the horn be used for that purpose, but the horns, the tin horns, would only be used if farmers in these reverberating hills of upstate New York needed help, if the authorities were coming to do an eviction. And so what would then happen when a farmer blew their horn was within an hour or so, there would be 1,000 people there to support that farmer and to make the authorities leave. And authorities will leave under those circumstances, and they will still leave under those circumstances today. And things haven't changed that much. You get 1,000 people to stop an eviction, that eviction is going to stop. And if you get them back the next day, it has to be ongoing. And it was ongoing for 9 years. But every time the authorities tried to stop to take animals or foreclose on someone's farm, or people would blow the horn, and then there'd have to be 1,000 people there. And they didn't just show up. They showed up, 1,000 angry armed farmers. That's true. I mean, okay, it very much helps if you're on horseback and you have a gun. But they were wearing also masks, which is very appropriate for the times now. But they were wearing masks and dressed up to look like animals and speaking in a really simplified form of English in order to basically not be recognizable, hopefully, by, their mode of speech, or by, things they said, or they were trying to basically, disguise themselves as well as possible. Still today in upstate New York, people digging around in the dirt back there find old masks from the rent strikes of the 1840s. Because at the end of the rent strike, there was a party that formed in New York that was in the legislature. The rent strike party had a lot of influence on policies back then. And so the movement kind of dissipated as it became also partly an electoral movement. And another reason it dissipated was, very unfortunately, a cop was killed in 1848. And so people got scared after that, and they buried their masks and uniforms so that nobody would know that they were part of this movement. And still today, if you dig around in the dirt in that part of New York, people are still coming across masks from the rent strike. The patroons came from Holland to America, became landlords where none had been before. Soon one man owned 500,000 acres on both sides of the Hudson River shore. He invited families to move in and give him 30% of everything they grew every year. This is how they'd pay the rent. His name was Van Rensselaer. He became one of the richest men on earth. In today's terms, $90 billion is how much he'd be worth. All this for doing nothing but saying all of this was his. I have the power of the state behind me, and I'm in the landlord biz. After 200 years of this and one revolution won, another Van Rensselaer had another son, and this Rensselaer was greedier than his ancestors, dead and past. It was the 1840s, and things were changing fast. It was the straw that broke the back. The bottle was uncorked. They started organizing meetings, the tenant farmers of New York. They found the strength of numbers. They found the power of suggestion. They found each other asking the same question. Who gave you the right to be a landlord? To live a life of ease while others toil? Who gave you the right to be a rich man while the rest of us pay you so we can work this soil? They vowed they would stop the rent collection. They vowed they'd bring this madness to an end. And when one blew the tin horn of distress, he soon found he had 1,000 friends, dressed in calico skirts with masks upon their faces, on horseback armed with knives and guns. They chanted and they yelled, they kept their farms, and they kept the sheriffs on the run. They asked, who gave you the right to be a landlord? To live a life of ease while others toil? Who gave you the right to be a rich man while the rest of us pay you so we can work this soil? The governor's militias tried to stop them, but nothing could be done to break their will. And by 1848, the landlords buckled, sold their holdings to the farmers in the hills. Yes, they overthrew this feudal system, but it's been replaced by speculators and banks, and you can still hear the homeless families asking of all the landed gentry in our ranks, who gave you the right to be a landlord? To live a life of ease while others toil? Who gave you the right to be a rich man while the rest of us pay you so we can work this soil? Who gave you the right to be a landlord? To live a life of ease while others toil? Who gave you the right to be a rich man while the rest of us pay you so we can work this soil? Who gave you the right? At this point, everybody's supposed to applaud loudly, leave their homes, and start burning things down. But I'll just imagine that part. Let's see. Cultural politics. I must have missed something. Or maybe culture. Somebody said something about cultural politics. I'm not sure what that is, but this is both politics and culture, so I guess it's cultural politics. But the political is cultural and the cultural is political. even if you're pretending you're not being political, that's also political. But I'm so glad, speaking of culture and politics, that Britney Spears supports a general strike. I suddenly have so much more admiration for Britney Spears. But she is from Kentucky, isn't she? So it makes sense. People in Kentucky are more likely to have class consciousness because they are usually getting screwed by the ruling class more often than other people. Going way back to the founding of the state, actually, Kentucky was founded as a corrupt little fiefdom of the landlords. And it still is. Ohio was much better off for a long time because it was settled in a more equitable way. Hey, it was wonderful. People watching from around the world, from countries where the government has suspended rent and mortgages for the duration, freezing the economy. That's happening in many countries in Europe now. Suspension of rent and mortgages and all sorts of other things. However, it's not happening here yet. But and somebody on YouTube there is mentioning Ethan Miller and Kate Boverman, and I think that they are wonderful, and I have not seen them in like 20 years, so I have no idea. But great songwriters last I checked. So I think I've probably ranted enough for one live stream, but I'm going to leave you with another song. We are facing a global pandemic, in addition to the incompetence of the capitalist class in the United States declaring class war on us. We are facing a global pandemic. It's a real pandemic. It is not a seasonal flu. It will kill a lot of people. There's going to be a lot of people dying in the next few months. And this has happened before. This is a song about the last global pandemic that killed tens of millions of people. I just wrote it. World War was raging like the earth had never seen. A whole generation lined up in trenches with killing machines. But aside from a few islands and some mountain peaks, the pandemic killed more people in just 24 weeks. No one knows where it began. Speculation's gone on for years. The trenches of Europe is where the deadly strain appears. From packed trains and hospitals around the globe, it spread this war strain of the virus that left so many dead. Death toll was unequal, but barely anywhere was left untouched, though the greatest share of dying was reserved for the poorest, densest colonies of the empires in their wars that created this disease. If you have a couple hours, then do something with me. Conduct a little research into your family tree. If you look into it, it won't take long. Quite likely you will find in 1918 you left an ancestor behind. The pandemic knew no borders. It went from the front lines, which had increased its deadliness as if by design. It circled the whole planet. So many people died, they dug mass graves everywhere. Put your relatives inside. A world war was raging like the earth had never seen. A whole generation lined up in trenches with killing machines. But aside from a few islands and some mountain peaks, the pandemic killed more people in just 24 weeks. And that's all true. And I will be doing more live stream broadcasts this week. on all of most of the same platforms, whatever you're watching on now. It should be on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, VK, and something else that I'm forgetting. Twitch. Actually, Twitch is probably the easiest place. Twitch.tv/David Rovix. If you're not sure which platform to watch on, that's the one that works the best. Although I think it's owned by a billionaire who just got richer over the past few weeks because he owns Amazon. But hey, thank you so much for listening. If you live in a state in the United States that has suspended evictions, do not pay your rent. If you don't pay your rent over the next few months, then you stand possibly to be able to take advantage of the deal that will be worked out after millions of people don't pay their rent for several months. The deal that will be worked out between us and the state and the corporations. There will be a deal worked out, but we have to push this. We have to take risks. Taking risks, mutual aid, solidarity, it involves taking risks. And you have to take risks now. And if you do, you will get a lot for your risks for you and for your neighbors. If you don't, no, we're screwed. And if you do take risks, we may be screwed too. But if you don't, you'll be screwed. So you might as well take risks. That's usually what makes people take risks in these situations, okay? Most people are going to take risks because they have really no other real option. For those of us who do have other options, we are the ones who need to take the risks. We are the ones who need to stick our necks out at this point. This is the time to do that, not tomorrow. Thank you very much for listening and watching. Please share this broadcast. And please tune in tomorrow. If you like, I'll be doing a viral solidarity concert sponsored by Canada's National Union of Public and General Employees. A broadcast on the very high quality equipment, I hope, if all goes well, at Big Red Studio. There's always this sort of uncertainty about live streaming, but we will be playing, I will be playing tomorrow 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern from Big Red Studio, live streaming right here on these various platforms sponsored by and on the Facebook page of Canada's National Union of Public and General Employees. And then on Saturday at 1 p.m. Pacific, I'll be back in my living room right here doing a concert here on the internet directed at the Europeans, specifically the anarchists of Belgium, some of whom are looking at possibly losing a venue. Of course, there's so many of these venues that we are facing the loss of all over the place as a result of this situation. But one thing to mention here, which has been mentioned on NPR. Hopefully people have heard this from other sources as well. But, the corporations like Cheesecake Factory and Subway Sandwiches and Macy's are leading the way in this rent strike. They are not paying the rent in their corporate, in their stores and stuff to the same landlords in many cases. In my case, the same landlords that own their commercial properties who also own these residential properties. So if these people that run these companies are making this calculated risk, this calculation that they're better off holding onto that money rather than paying rent for it, what kind of fool would you be if you live in a state like where evictions have been suspended to pay your rent? I understand if you don't live in a state like that and you're worried about actually getting evicted, but if evictions have been suspended, you can at least take that risk. Stop paying your rent now, today. Thank you. See you here in the Matrix soon. Have a good evening in quarantine. And I don't know what to say otherwise. It sucks to be in quarantine. It sucks for all you people who are lonely. It sucks for all you people who are stuck with one or two other people that you may love very much, but did not want to actually spend 24/7 with all the time. It's tough, especially for people working in hospitals, for people who are sick and dying, and people living on the streets. That's generally the case, and it's even more the case now. And I hope that we can change all that. This is one of those moments that we need to try. And actually, see, I'm trying not to go on and say anything that's unnecessary because I just want to, say important things. But I'm going to do one more song to see you off. For tomorrow's show, I'm going to have an actual set list, and I'm going to talk less. And somebody from Canada Union of Public Employees, CUPE too, that's another one. There's NUPKE and CUPE, and they both have public employees. We have a CUPE coffee cup, and it's like the most indestructible coffee cup. We've had it for decades, and so every time we're drinking coffee, we think of the Canadian Union of Public Employees. And then my friend Sine in Copenhagen gave us a coffee cup that says, still not loving the police. And that thing has lasted like 15 years. We never dropped that one. So those are the two coffee cups. This song is about reality. And it's not a joke. And I did not make this up. And it is not wishful thinking. And it is not utopianism. It is real. Ideas can change everything. That's real. Things can change very quickly. That's real. This is not utopian. This is real. First, you have to have a problem. That part isn't hard. The second step is everybody realizing they're like you. They're holding the same card. Step 3 is finding there's a tactic when everyone believes it could be true. That if all the people work collectively, there just might be something we can do, and everything could change. So quick. Congressmen and businessmen and TV sets will try hard to make sure it isn't so. You don't have a problem. And if you do, it's not the same problem if it is. There's just nowhere you can go. But it's happened many times. The history is rich, though we easily forget how a meme can take hold and grab you, how it can spread out like a net, and everything can change. So quick. They'll say we're lost, or we're dreaming, or they'll make a dream for us. They'll try to come up with a good story about why we belong at the back of the bus, about why we belong in this position, about how we don't know what we meant, about how there most certainly isn't any such thing as the 99%, but everything can change. So quick. Everything can change. So quick. See you here in the Matrix and on the streets.